Well, thanks for staying with us. Time now for Media Watch, for which I'm joined by James Creedon.
Good evening, Georgia.
Evening, James. Now, Occupy Wall Street movement, it's been around for about 3 weeks now, continued to gather momentum. What's being said?
Well, let's just have a look at it. It's creating so much discussion online. It's really quite interesting. Let's have a look at Forbes magazine. Now, this headline, Georgia, that you can see online is from mid-July. Bearing in mind that this movement is only 3 weeks old, from Tahrir Square in Egypt, of course, to Wall Street ? Now, it was just a question mark back then because the initial appeal or call for that movement had just been launched. The question mark is now gone. You can see in Foreign Policy from Tahrir Square to Wall Street. Now, this article was written by Joshua Keating. Now, he interviewed Tahrir Square activists to see what Occupy Wall Street could learn from them. Of course, these activists in New York and elsewhere say that they were inspired by what happened in Egypt and elsewhere, inspired by the Arab Spring. So he spoke to this guy whose Twitter feed was a must-read during the time of the Tahrir Square protests, Mossab El-Shami. Now, he was giving his tips, basically, to the New York protesters. First of which was, you don't need a leader, but you do need a platform. So that was his first piece of advice. In other words, that platform should be a message that is kept relatively simple. You need to, I suppose, have 3 or 4 points that everyone can agree upon. A lot of what the New York or the Occupy Wall Street protesters have been criticized about is that their message isn't clear enough. Now, the next thing he said is widen the base. So widen the base of people who join the movement. Thirdly, he said, insofar as possible, stay friendly with the police. Of course, that didn't work out so well in Egypt. And indeed, there have been demonstrations which have got quite nasty, indeed, the police reaction has been quite heavy-handed at times in New York. Fourthly, don't blame the media, he said. Change the narrative. As in Egypt, New York protesters have blamed the media for not covering the event enough. He's saying be as neutral and as friendly as possible to every journalist. And finally, he said keep the energy up. In a movement without a central leader, El-Shami says it is particularly important for the most active participants to keep everyone else motivated. So from reading that in such a kind of a mainstream journal as Foreign Policy, you would think that everybody agrees with the comparison between Tahrir Square and Occupy Wall Street. Not so. If you look at The Economist, whose issue came out today, their Lexington blog or Lexington article says America has already had its revolution. In fact, many of the people who were demonstrating in Cairo were demonstrating for the freedoms that Americans benefit from. America is the sort of democracy that many people in Tahrir Square were asking for, and with its endless elections and permanent campaigns, it is exquisitely sensitive to voters' wants. So they're saying basically Occupy Wall Street people go through the already provided political channels.
Now, still a lot of tributes pouring in to Steve Jobs. He died on Wednesday, the Apple co-founder. But there's been some discussion about just how many jobs his company, Apple, actually has created.
That's right. Now, Steve Jobs, Jobs creator, this is in the New Republic. They're pointing out that many people have compared him to some of the big entrepreneurs of the last 100 years, such as Henry Ford in the US. He created over 100,000 jobs in just one plant alone in the 1930s in the US. Actually, that's over double the entire number of jobs that Apple has created internationally. Now, this is according to slightly dated statistics from 2006 that the New Republic is using. Perhaps there aren't any more recent statistics, but they're pointing out that while his design-wise and ingenuity-wise he has been feted the world over, he hasn't really created that many jobs in the US, and most of the jobs that have been created went overseas.
Now, just very quickly, we're running out of time, but there has been a lot of talk about just how it would work should Greece be forced to leave the Eurozone.
Let's have a look at this headline in the Financial Times today, Georgia. Save the euro, let Greece default. And there are more and more of these articles saying that Greece will have to default, perhaps leave the Eurozone also. But what would that really entail? Well, the New York Times has been looking at this, and they're saying there's a risk of a bank run. Of course, the currency then afterwards would be greatly devalued, so many Greeks could run the risk of losing something like 2/3 of their money in terms of exchange rates. And the Wall Street Journal is pointing out something quite interesting. If the drachma, the former Greek currency, were to be brought back, it would have to be done so in the utmost secrecy, because if it were to be found out that drachma notes were being printed again, there are no more drachma notes in Greece, that would mean that the old currency is going to come back in, which could bring about a bank run. So it would have to be done in the greatest secrecy possible. And that really, in this day and age, with, I suppose, media being as instant as they are, it would be very difficult to keep secret.
Well, thanks very much for that roundup, James. Well, that's it for Media Watch. We'll have all the latest international headlines and culture coming up shortly. Beatles legend John Lennon would have turned 71 on Sunday. His widow Yoko Ono's put on a free exhibition in New York of some of his art to mark the occasion. Stay with us.